Good afternoon to all of you who are in Mongolia and Korea and other parts of Asia, and good morning to all of us who are here in Europe. I'm delighted actually to welcome everyone here today to attend ODI's online event on sustainable economic recovery in Mongolia, challenges and opportunities. My name is Suma Chakrabarti. I'm chairman of ODI's Board of Trustees, and I'll be chairing today's event. I guess not just in my capacity as chair of ODI's board, but as someone with a real interest in emerging markets and in this field. I've been working on emerging and developing countries for 40 plus years now. And when I was president of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, EBRD, between 2012 and 2020, I engaged very closely with Mongolia. It was one of my favorite places to visit and to work with the Mongolian authorities. I visited the country at least 3 times, I think. In fact, it was one of the last countries I visited before lockdown took over. So I think one of the key lessons, I guess, from this rather long career is the importance of market-friendly policy reform, improving investment climates to spur economic recovery and development, indeed. Mongolia's new recovery policy, which was launched in December 2021, well, it's more than just a roadmap to recover from the economic damage that was inflicted by COVID-19. It's also a key part of the government's long-term strategy to become an industrialized state. So Mongolia's new recovery policy, I think it aims to spur economic growth in a number of areas, including energy, border ports, industrialization, urban and rural recovery, green development, and importantly, public sector efficiency as well. I think it's very much part of the country's longer term Vision 2050, which aims to transform Mongolia into a leading Asian country in terms of its social development, its economic growth, and its citizens' quality of life. This event is, of course, taking place in the aftermath of protracted border lockdowns in COVID-19 China, Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine, 2 incidents which have, of course, seriously affected economic growth in the region and have also, of course, affected Mongolia's economy too. Now, building resilience, I think, to future shocks has to be a cornerstone of Mongolia's economic recovery. So I'm really delighted that we have so many high-level speakers here with us today. The first part will be to hear from our keynote speaker, His Excellency the Deputy Prime Minister, about the vision behind Mongolia's economic plan. We'll then have a brief presentation from ODI, which puts the new recovery policy into context and also introduces an upcoming report, which is going to be published at the end of this month. I'll then invite our distinguished panelists to discuss some of the key issues facing Mongolia as it navigates economic and environmentally sustainable recovery. And finally, if we have enough time, I really hope the panel discussion can be followed by a short Q&A session with the audience. So I encourage everyone who's listening into this to write your questions into the chat function. So without further ado, let me introduce our keynote speaker for today's event, His Excellency Amasaikhon Sayunbuyon, the Deputy Prime Minister of Mongolia. Mr. Amasaikhon was appointed Deputy Prime Minister of Mongolia in 2021, but he has a number of other roles as well. He's a very busy man, it seems. He's head of the State Emergency Commission. He co-heads the Mongolia-European Union Cooperation Committee, the Chamber of Commerce and Investment between Mongolia and the United States, and roundtables with countries including Britain and Canada. So we're very lucky to have a little bit of his time today, given his wide range of roles.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Your Excellency, let me ask you to take the floor.
Well, first, I would like to express my gratitude to the Overseas Development Institute and the chair of its board, Sir Suma Chakrabarti, for arranging today's online launch event and giving me a floor to talk about the new recovery policy pursued by the government of Mongolia. So like you mentioned, this launch event is being held in a rather critical time, and I certainly agree with you. So during the past 2 years of COVID-19 pandemic, like any other countries, Mongolia made great strides in saving lives and rescuing livelihoods of households. Financial institutions such as the World Bank and International Monetary Fund and Asian Development Bank reported that Mongolia's post-pandemic recovery is gaining momentum. And we're quite optimistic and positive about that. A sharp uptick in our 2022 GDP reflects 4% growth, which we are expecting to continue in the upcoming years. The launching of an underground operation at the Oyu Tolgoi copper mine is, this month gives us a reason for such good and high expectations too. I could mention the Mongolian government unveiled the new recovery policy in December 2020. The initial 10-year phase of our long-term development policy, known as Vision 2050. So the new recovery policy represents almost 150 trillion or 49 billion US dollars in investment opportunity and aims to create a vibrant economy. So with the new recovery policy, we have highlighted 6 areas in the Mongolian economy, including bottlenecks at the border crossings. As a result, we're working to increase our border ports capacity 3 times and total export capacity by 20 billion USD by 2030. So in the past 3 years, we have built nearly 1,000 kilometers of long railways on our own resource and investment, which would increase our export capacity 2 to 3-fold in the next 3 years. So our energy infrastructure are mostly relying on coal, as you already know. So therefore, Mongolia is committed to shifting to low carbon solutions like solar, wind, and hydrogen. We're planning to build 2 new hydroelectric dams by 2030. So by the 2030, we will provide 30% of our energy demand with renewable energy resource. And we have this potential, and it could be even more. So we are working on to widening our energy resource and transmission distribution grids and networks.
So as many of you know, ODI is a global affairs think tank. It was founded in 1960, and the research of ODI informs policy design. ODI also convenes leadership around the world on a number of international challenges. In particular, ODI's Global Risks and Resilience Program is very active in working to understand global and country transitions. And at the end of this month, ODI will be launching a report on Mongolia's economic transition, which provides an overview of the new recovery policy that the Deputy Prime Minister was just talking about. That report will analyze also the economic challenges facing Mongolia and highlights the case and opportunities for greening its growth. So let me now invite Elvira Mami and Elena Borodina, who are both senior analysts in ODI's Global Risks and Resilience Program, to briefly introduce this report and then help us situate the new recovery policy in context. Elvira and Elena, over to you.
Good morning. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. We are going to provide some context for today's discussion and talk about Mongolia's economy, new recovery policy, and our recommendations. I will start with looking into Mongolia's economic growth in the last decade. Mongolia's economy grew at a remarkable rate, averaging almost 8% in the last decade, growth mainly driven by the mining revenue. Due to the pandemic and the border closures with China, the economy contracted 4.6% in 2020. The war in Ukraine has affected Mongolia through distorted supply chains and elevated food and fuel prices, since the country imports wheat, fertilizers, and energy from Russia. Depreciation of Tugrik has increased the price of imports, thereby affecting consumption. The extractive sector contributes 90% of exports of Mongolia and 24% of GDP. As can be seen from this graph, Mongolia GDP is highly correlated with copper and coal prices. Economic recovery in Mongolia, like in many export and import-dependent countries, is vulnerable to external price shocks. Due to little domestic and international diversification, recovery depends on exports of raw materials to China. Moreover, high export costs and poor infrastructure links hinder trade. Top Mongolian exports are copper, coal, gold, animal hair, wool and cashmere, exporting mostly to China, Switzerland, Singapore, and Korea. Mongolia was top exporter of raw and processed animal hair in the world in 2021. Mongolian top imports in 2021 are refined petroleum products, cars, machinery, and electricity, importing mostly from China, Russia, Japan, and Korea. It is expected that the launch of new railways such as Zunbayan-Hangi Railway in November last year and Tavan-Talgoy Line in September last year will boost trade in the upcoming year. The outlook for 2023 is positive. The GDP per capita at the end of last year was $4,500. GDP growth projected for 2023 is up to 7%. China's economic recovery is likely to support Mongolian economic growth. Upcoming launch of the largest mining project in Mongolia's history promises to support the economy of the country. However, the inflation remains high and the fiscal space is limited. Given that the Mongol bank interest rate is already high at 13%, any further rises to suppress inflation may hinder small and medium enterprises. The launch of Oyu Tolgoi is likely to positively affect the mining revenue. And it is critical that given high import dependency of the consumption in Mongolia, that the country utilizes the mining revenues to increase the value added in the mining sector and develop non-mining sectors of the economy, and that the country avoids increasing imports and any further pressure on the exchange rate, the currency, and the consumption. Some of the measures that Mongolia should undertake for industrial growth include upgrading of the sectors of the economy, such as cashmere and leather, increasing FDI in non-mining sectors, supporting local suppliers to the mining sector, improving business environment to support small and medium enterprises. Under the new recovery policy, Mongolia is already planning to increase the value added in the traditional copper industry, for example, by investing into smelting and refining and producing finished copper products. Improving infrastructure links and reducing export costs will also help to boost trade and support local businesses. I will now hand over to my colleague Olena, who will talk about the new recovery policy and the green transition.
Thank you, Elvira, and thank you to our distinguished guests and chair for joining the discussion today. Some of you may already be familiar with the government policy to support sustainable recovery of the country. Mongolia has several policies to support medium and long-term development, which include the Vision 2050 that was adopted in 2020, but also the new recovery policy that was that aims to double the GDP per capita by 2030. The new recovery policy aligns with the first stage of Vision 2050 and goes up to 2030, and it aims to support the country's recovery and lay the groundwork for further growth by addressing 6 key economic constraints. These include trade ports, energy industrialization, urban and rural development, green development, and efficient governance. The reform package combines both key infrastructure initiatives and public-private partnerships, as well as partial privatization of enterprises. While the new recovery policy itself does not contain projects, the implementation plan of the new recovery policy accelerator does contain 94 key investment projects to date that cover the key priority areas. These are heavily concentrated in port and energy revival with 43 and 21 projects respectively, and are followed by industrial revival with 15 projects, urban and rural development with 7 projects, green growth with 5 projects, and public sector efficiency where there are 7 projects. When it comes to green development, I think a number of people, we have already mentioned that green development is part of the government's medium and long-term vision. And even the earlier green development policy has emphasized the need to shift from growth first and clean it up later model to one that's more environmentally sustainable and inclusive. Why does the country need to pursue green development as part of its recovery policy? Well, the new recovery policy highlights several environmental and climate challenges that are facing the country as it pursues recovery. These include above 2 degrees warming in average temperatures in the last 80 years, high levels of desertification and land degradation, but also high share of total water, surface water as total water resources, which makes the country vulnerable to water stress. In terms of sectoral opportunities, Mongolia has huge untapped renewable energy potential that's assessed at 2.6 terawatts of both solar and wind power. And the country has already launched several projects in the last decade to capitalize on that potential, with new solar projects to be added under the new recovery policy. Under the new recovery policy itself, under the green development pillar, the country has 2 flagship initiatives. There is the 1 billion trees national initiative that aims to combat desertification and land degradation, but also the Blue Horse projects that will supply growing domestic and industrial water needs of the Gobi region, where most of the mining is concentrated. And measures pursued under other pillars, such as adding new solar projects, will also support green recovery and growth. And there are also opportunities to support green development under other pillars, such as industrialization, by pursuing green mining practices. And I will now hand over to Elvira to talk through some of the policy implications that we have identified in our emerging analysis.
Thank you so much. Yeah, the government of Mongolia has come a long way in supporting the sustainable economic recovery of the country. Nevertheless, there is still scope to maximize the effectiveness of these policies and to strengthen the resilience of the economy to economic shocks. To achieve its ambitious goals, Mongolia should undertake an effective mechanism for strategy monitoring and implementation. To facilitate the monitoring of the strategies, the implementation plan should contain a list of strategic priorities, actions to achieve these priorities, a breakdown of long and short-term measures, and realistic key performance indicators. New recovery reform package efficiency will be maximized when it is supplemented by a transparent mechanism of investment project selection, access of SMEs to these projects, analysis of privatization of state-owned enterprises. Mongolia should continue to create a favorable investment climate for investors, both domestic and foreign, and to improve the business environment by facilitating business opening processes and removing bureaucratic hurdles for businesses. Government should continue implementing incentives to stimulate investment into higher value-added sectors of the economy. Among other measures, such incentives may include supporting the local suppliers to the mining sector. The country should continue to ensure that international good practices for environmental and social risk management are followed, and opportunities to improve companies' ESG practices are maximized for all future investment projects across sectors. Mongolia should continue its efforts to strengthen institutional capacity. International experience shows that institutional quality is the only determining factor of success or failure of any policy. With its relatively small population, vast mineral resources, big neighboring markets, and upcoming launch of the largest mining project of its history, Mongolia can utilize its opportunities to strengthen its resilience to economic shocks of the future and to build a robust industrial economy. Thank you so much.
To widening our new energy resource transmission and distribution networks and grids. Also, while aiming to maintain our relations with our immediate 2 neighbors, we continue to seek to explore new markets with tourism and trade of agricultural-based business, which is based on value-added like products and services, goods and commodities, natural resource. Our government is taking several actions to attract foreign direct investment by denationalizing state-owned companies and banks that need investment, skilled management, and marketing of their products need to be promoted. One of them is that our government launched 5-point campaign to fight corruption. We would like to see our current corruption index become two-digit through a comprehensive campaign of encouraging like whistleblowers, which has 6 components: mopping off and calling corrupted officials to justice, and repatriation of fugitives, and transparency in governance. Efficient and sound governance is our priority. And by removing red tape, corruption, and abuse of power is vital for our government. So by fulfilling them, Mongolia will become more attractive destination for foreign direct investment, and we will have more internationally accepted standard and legal and business environments. That's what we are expecting. So, for example, the Southwest will become a center of wind energy and green development. There is huge natural potential there. The Southeast will focus on wildlife protection and also like a plantological hub. So the North will become a manufacturing hub with suburbs of Ulaanbaatar city will be turned into modern business parks with improved public transport system and decentralize the current population of the capital city by implementing new public transportation systems, constructing bypassing highways and railways, and also constructing 2 modern cities. It is also underway. The parliament, the government have already approved the decision, and the master plans are on the way. And bypassing highways will be connecting Eurasian markets like China and Russian borders will be connected. So we will have more access international routes to encourage our economy. So this will improve also our urban development and will bring more wealth across our country and region. There is an inadequate industrial and trade infrastructure due to a lack of investment and infrastructure opportunities in rural areas that will still need to pay attention. So our Billion Tree Initiative will replant 600,000 hectares of land and will prevent soil erosion and ensure improved carbon storage. We will upgrade the capacity of the current infrastructure, protect elevated and arid land, and plant trees against the land degradation and caused by city and also desertification to reduce the climate change and also commit and contribute ourselves. Last but not least, it is disaster risk reduction. It is becoming more serious and more important, including increasing public awareness and improving the early warning system at national, regional, and local levels, which could help avoid the loss of resource we have that could be used for sustainable growth in the future. So that's what our government is aiming. And these are the main issues our government is focusing within the new recovery policy. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Deputy Prime Minister. I'm so glad we re-established the connection, because that was a very rich presentation, I think, of the challenges, the opportunities, and also the commitment to drive policy reform. And I mean, I've always been a great admirer, frankly, of Mongolia in terms of both the political and the economic path that it's chosen and the way it's gone forward on that. I mean, I think what you said about renewable energy is really, really important. I remember my first visit to Mongolia. EBRD had just invested in the first wind farm in Salkit, just outside Ulaanbaatar. It was a wonderful visit, and I went to the wind project, and everything was going fine. The EBRD had forgotten one thing, which is they didn't arrange any wind that day. So unfortunately, the blades weren't moving. But it was a great project, and I think what you're hearing, your emphasis on renewable energy is wonderful. The emphasis on the bottlenecks at the borders, trying to fight that as well. Sustainable infrastructure, and very interesting what you said about the regional comparative advantage. Different regions specializing in different, different industries and so on. That's really important. I must say also what you said about fighting corruption, very, very welcome and really, really important. And I think one other point you didn't mention, but I'd like to mention, which is, I think, which is, I think Mongolia is a real model of a country that's, post-communist, post-economic planning. It's really gone for both political democracy as well as economic democracy. And if you look at the latest Freedom House numbers, it's quite interesting how Mongolia outranks any other country in the region by a long distance. I mean, it's a huge gap. And I admire the fact that you've tried to do both and not just one of those two major things. And I think it's a real role model to emerging markets in many ways. So we're going to move now into the sort of panel discussion. And Deputy Prime Minister, I'd like to start with you with just one question, which is about really, could you say a little bit more about how Mongolia is going to support industrialization, industrial development, particularly industrial development? What are the things you'd highlight that Mongolia will be doing in that area?
Well, thank you. Like you mentioned, Mongolia is a truly vibrant and functional democracy in the region, and we are proud of that. And also we are very satisfied with what you have said. And also thank you for your support and strong cooperation in improving human rights and also the respect of law and also the other common values of democracy around the globe. So let me get back to this, your question. I will try to answer briefly. New recovery policy, we have identified 6 areas you can find in our Vision 20. Like new energy resource transmission and distribution, like I mentioned earlier, networks will be established, as well as having the capacity enhanced and upgrade the current and existing aged infrastructure. While coal production forms a core part of this, Mongolia is also committed to transitioning to a low carbon solutions like solar and wind and hydrogen power, and including wind development, as I mentioned earlier. The government of Mongolia is, aiming to attract more foreign investment to invest in infrastructure sector of Mongolia based on public-private partnership, and we are also working to establish international financial center in Mongolia so that the foreign investors, whether it's foreign or local investors, they could all enjoy international service or business like banking, insurance, or legal or financial services at the same level where you could find these services anywhere in the world, like in London or Singapore or whatever, wherever it is. So the government's aim is very ambitious, and we're looking into increase our border capacity threefold, increasing total export by 20 billion by 2030, which is in the next coming 5-6 years. So also with advanced technologies, our industries will be modernized and digitized, thereby increasing the volume of value-added goods for both domestic use and also foreign export. Because basically now we are almost import dependent, starting from oil, fuel, or other products and service. Almost more than 50% of whether it's building materials or grocery items. But we aim to be a producer, initiated by the President of Mongolia and also driven by the Prime Minister of Mongolia and our cabinet. We are determined to use all our internal resources and have the private sectors and the citizens involved in the development of production and processing sectors. So that's how we will promote them and support them with in terms of legal, environment, improve maybe tax policy or have better infrastructure and give them some promotion of some tax, other incentives. So that's what we are looking at to improve the industrial sector and also industrialize the country. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That's again very clear explanation of the policy around industrial development. It's very, very useful. And I commend, in particular, what you said about trying to create an international financial center. I think that will be very helpful. I mean, I'm involved with the Astana International Financial Center, and that's been one of the successes, I think, in Kazakhstan. I would particularly recommend trying to create the legal jurisdiction around the International Financial Center, because that has been probably the most successful part of the Kazakh experience, actually, in attracting investors and bringing English common law, which is what most investors are looking for in terms of settling disputes. So I'd be very happy myself to talk to you about that at some point.
Yes, I look forward to having more detailed discussion with you later on with you. Like you said, this financial center with institutional or legal jurisdiction with the English common law, that's what we are aiming at. Thank you. Yeah.
Very good. Well, let me turn now to my former colleague, Zsuzsanna Hargitay. Zsuzsa, I think you have to leave in about 10 minutes or so. So I'm going to try and ask you both questions. Zsuzsa is the managing director for Central Asia and Mongolia at the EBRD. And of course, we know, Zsuzsa, that foreign investment is absolutely critical part of the new recovery policy. Huge potential role for the EBRD coming up, I can see, both in terms of investments and policy work in the country in supporting the transition. From your knowledge and experience of the economy of Mongolia, you were there very recently, I know. What are the sort of key challenges in the country's economic recovery? That would be question one. I think the second question, if you have time, you can just say a bit about that. You've done a lot of work around SMEs in Mongolia. How have SMEs fared through the double shocks of COVID and the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict? And what is EBRD doing to try and help those SMEs get through this situation? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Suma. Good to see you. But actually, I think that you were at one of my meetings last week, because what we were discussing with our government counterparts was the investment law. And we are going to review that draft and setting up an international court. So at least in spirits, we were there where we were, when was it now, 7 or 8 years ago in Kazakhstan. And we have an understanding, but then, dear Deputy Prime Minister, this would probably need to be reflected also in the new constitution, so that there will be an offshore island for international jurisdiction. But this is one of the policy measures that the government of Mongolia is contemplating, and will be there to review the new investment law. And we would be delighted to help with setting up an international court in Mongolia to start with, because whether we are talking about foreign investment or small and medium-sized enterprises, this has been considered as one of the impediments. The courts are slow, not really reliable. Deputy Prime Minister, you are aware that we are setting up an out-of-court dispute settlement system in Mongolia. And again, this is one of the, I noted down for myself, 5 impediments that both foreign investors and SMEs quote. Going into the still foreign direct investment sector, it is indeed the pride of EBRD having financed 3 out of the 3 wind farms in Mongolia. However, Deputy Prime Minister, there are issues, there are legacy issues. These were the early enters, and for all those of you who love the terminology of renewable energies, the feed-in tariffs, they are abominably high. they are abominably high now in 2022, 2023, because what we do nowadays is that, number one, technology costs have gone down. Competition also brought in new investments. So I would like to use this opportunity also to argue for resolving the outstanding issues, because it's important only for two of your strategic priorities. Number one is to bring foreign direct investment into the country, and there is no better messenger than a happy foreign investor. And this is something that I think, with a bit of goodwill, can be resolved in weeks. We are talking about now issues that have been outstanding for years. And you, together with Rio Tinto, were able to solve the outstanding issues of Oyu Tolgoi. I was very delighted to be in Mongolia when the underground mine went into operation. And I believe that there is a trustworthy, good relationship between the government of Mongolia and Rio Tinto, and that will result in a lot of goodwill in the country. SMEs, EBRD invests in Mongolia. I leave aside Oyu Tolgoi, which is a mega project, between 100 up to $200 million per annum. The good news is that half of it goes to support SMEs. These are credit lines. You've got a good, solid banking system. We have excellent partner banks, with Han Bank, with Hasbank, microfinance institutions. Still, access to finance remains an issue simply because of the higher collateral requirements. So we started a discussion about potentially establishing a credit guarantee fund for SMEs, whereby, again, for good SMEs, the government could step in, lowering basically the cost of financing, while again, this would be available to the best of these SMEs. But Suma, SMEs, we have seen galore. The Deputy Prime Minister mentioned suppliers. Suppliers to Oyu Tolgoi, they are hundreds of SMEs that live on that. They get timely payment. We can provide them also with guarantees. So suppliers to large companies, there are a lot of them. A lot of agribusiness, Suma, since you were there in Mongolia, has grown. They have grown into production, including using the latest technology. I don't know which type of hydroponic growing that was going there, but a lot of our clients, they go big time into using new technology, whether for animal husbandry and meat processing or in vegetables production, and they are growing. They deserve also support, as much as we have a lot of our clients that are going into construction, material manufacturing, and packaging material manufacturing. And last but not least, let me mention two other areas. I have met a lot of Mongolian companies in the ICT sector. They are brilliant. I hope that your plan to establish the new Ulaanbaatar city next to the airport that would also house ICT companies will materialize soon. They deserve all the support they have, in parallel with a growing entertainment industry. Mongolia is becoming a host of film studios, music studios. It's close enough, yes, to Korea, and you have now an agreement on cooperation in this industry that could give it another boost. And last but not least, Kashmir and leather. We very much welcome, also as part of anti-corruption measures, establishing a commodities exchange in Ulaanbaatar for coal, to be followed, I hope, very soon for copper concentrate and also Kashmir and leather that could show the ways. And last but not least, the issues. I mentioned already access to finance. Number two, where we hope to do more also with the government of Mongolia, is skills for jobs, so that the education system provides curricula and trainers that make young people job ready. A lot of, especially SMEs, have complained about not having enough of highly skilled young entering their business. Dispute settlement I mentioned already. The development of logistics is key to them, because they are using, for the time being, more import products rather than export, but many of them have started exporting. So what the government is doing with the dry port development is crucial. Also, the development of the railway network, where you are hamstrung with a historic legacy, but I have seen private companies developing their own railways. And last but not least, developing secondary cities, public services. I finally managed because we were financing it, to get on the road to Darhan. We met with the governor of the province. A lot has been done already, but public services, starting with hospital up to education, and then also, again, keeping the young people there and away from Ulaanbaatar traffic jam would be important, whether it's Darhan, whether it's Erdenet. These are my couple of words, including impressions from my last visit, which now was the 5th visit to Mongolia. And we have a fat investment pipeline that is still dominated by the private sector. Again, I would like to reiterate what colleagues from ODI said. We can call it decarbonization, green transition strategy. And I know Mongolia is a vigorous democracy, especially in the region where I work now, and you need to look at the elections, but the work on the strategy should start now. This is my last plea. Because again, over governments, yes, the strategy will be adjusted, but starting with a low carbon pathway for the energy sector would be highly important. And we would be very happy at EBRD to help you with that, so that what you describe, starting with resolving current issues with renewables, going into harnessing the immense potential of Mongolia for renewable energy generation, including for Oyu Tolgoi. You could stop in the coming 2 to 3 years importing electricity from China, if only probably for balancing. That can be done, and we would be there for you. So the strategy work would start now with the first tenders for renewable energy starting in the second half of this year. Thank you very much, Suma.
Well, thank you, Zsuzsa. It's fantastic to hear that sort of, whole range of policies and investment opportunities. I mean, I can see that if the investment climate and policy climate keeps improving, the levels of investment EBRD and others will be able to do will go up quite clearly. There's a lot to be done, and I think that's very welcome. I loved what you said about the entertainment industry as well. That's a new one for me, and it's really good to hear about that. I can see the day will come when M-pop rivals K-pop, and we look forward to that as well. I think EBRD, Deputy Prime Minister, has great strengths, particularly in green transition. So the low carbon pathway, I think, is something that EBRD really should be closely involved in, if I can recommend that, with the Mongolian authorities. ODI also happens to be very strong in that area as well. So maybe there's an opportunity for a partnership, the tripartite partnership on that as well. Zsuzsa, you better go and catch your plane in Budapest airport. So we'll let you go. Thanks very much indeed. Let me turn now to introduce Ms. Bolorma Enkbat. Now, Ms. Enkbat is a governor. Actually, Zsuzsa mentioned the governor of Darhan, but Bolorma is the governor of Hovd province in Western Mongolia. Great to have you here with us today. It really is very good indeed. But prior to becoming governor, she served as chief of staff to the prime minister, during which time she actually led the working group which helped develop the new recovery policy. So she was right in the engine room, if you like, driving that work. Governor Enkbat, we've heard a lot about the new recovery policy from a national perspective. I think we're actually quite curious to hear from you about what it looks like at a regional level. How will this policy get implemented at regional level? His Excellency mentioned regional comparative advantage. So what's the key importance of this policy to your province, and what will it look like on the ground? Over to you.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you to ODI for organizing today's panel discussion. Now that I'm based in Hovd province, and just to give a brief overview, Mongolia has 21 provinces, and Hovd is based in the Western region, as you mentioned, and is center of the Western 5 provinces. One of the 6 pillars of the new recovery policy is balanced urban and rural growth. And this is one that is fully aligned with provincial growth. But all other recovery and all other pillars are absolutely critical to growth in the provincial areas. So particularly, I just want to mention one statistics which might really give an overview of the condition of Mongolia in terms of its density in Ulaanbaatar. For anyone who's been to Ulaanbaatar, it's a rather urban metropolitan city, and 50% of the population lives in Ulaanbaatar, which is just 0.3% of all land mass. So half of the population is concentrated in less than 1% of the the land, and 65% of GDP is produced in Ulaanbaatar. So the government's really focused on spreading this growth into rural areas. And for the Western region, as the Deputy Prime Minister mentioned, regional comparative advantages, and ours is really around connectivity and our proximity to, say, Kazakhstan, the western area of China, Xinjiang Uyghur region, as well as Russia. And we have an international highway through the Hof province, as well as the province that's already started transit of Russia-China transportation. So these are just examples of how we're a big part of the new recovery policy. Now, there are key projects that are specifically in the provincial levels and outside of Ulaanbaatar. For example, as we're talking about Rio Tinto and Oyu Tolgoi project, the copper mine, this is in our southern area of Umanhua province, and it's making a big impact on the local area. And a lot of these SMEs that we're discussing and suppliers, they're based in the rural areas. Similarly, in the Western region and specifically in Hof province, we have one of the larger renewable energy projects in the pipeline, which is the Erdenbrunn hydro plant. That's a bilateral project that's being implemented with the government of China. So this is a 90 megawatt renewable energy hydropower project, which is the largest that the country's ever built. The Setkik project that we're discussing is 50 megawatts. So 90 would be our largest renewable energy. And this, becomes the stepping stone to our next Igingol hydropower plant, which is 315 megawatts. And, these projects together will increase Mongolia's energy capacity twofold, and which really builds the idea of sustainable growth that we're talking about, a resilient growth that's a key part of all of new recovery policy. Now, another thing I want to highlight, which is key importance of this policy to Hoft as well as all other rural provinces, is the digitalization aspect and public sector productivity. So Mongolia is the least densely populated country in the world, as we all know. So in order to increase public sector productivity, the government's really given a lot of focus on digitalization and getting government services to rural areas through applications and all sorts of different models. And this is kind of giving everyone a sense of, yes, we can live in rural areas and be a part of this growth, be a part of this shared growth, and still receive government services. So I do want to highlight that the sixth pillar, which is public sector productivity, is a key part of kind of balanced growth and making sure that wherever you are in Mongolia, whether it be in urban or rural areas, you're getting the same type of government service with the same level of productivity.
Thank you very much indeed, Governor. I think that was very interesting, actually, both from the regional aspects in terms of the comparative advantage, also the particular location of province in terms of trade routes and so on, and with neighbors. But I also really was interested in what you said about public sector productivity as well, that a lot of these reforms which will of course encourage the private sector growth and private sector development in Mongolia cannot really happen unless the public sector also becomes much more effective and efficient. And I think the digital agenda is very important as part of that. So thank you for highlighting that too. Let me turn now to Mandul.
Hi, thank you for the introduction. So let me just briefly explain what is the Development Bank of Mongolia. This is the only policy bank of Mongolia with its own law, and it has 100% owned by the government with implicit guarantee. And the mandate is at least 60% of the loan portfolio must be export-oriented projects. And so all in all, the development bank itself is the financing arm of the government, so you can say. And the role of the bank is crucial to new economic recovery policy. as you may know, the new economic recovery policy has about 90 key projects that the government has identified as crucial to the development of the country. And at this moment, the bank is financing 3 of these projects, and we are looking into financing more projects in the future, starting this year. The challenges, of course, is I would say 2 main parts. First would be project preparation. Preparation takes so much time in Mongolia. It's due to the complicated procedure, as well as an inexperience of the government handling this large-scale project. The second area, I think, would be the unfamiliarity of foreign investors to Mongolian legal framework, as well as the way of doing things, so to say, the decision-making procedure, as well as the all the different regulations, different agencies of the government.
Thank you very much, actually, Mandul. That was very interesting. And I think project preparation, you're right to highlight that. That's a problem in just about every emerging market. I mean, this is not unusual. In fact, I started my career 40 years ago working in Botswana on exactly this issue. And it's still a huge issue in many, many countries. I know that. And I know EBRD, as usual, is not there. They put quite a lot of financing into infrastructure project preparation facility and so on, but these facilities haven't really quite taken off. And if we're to build the sustainable infrastructure in Mongolia that the Deputy Prime Minister talked about, clearly we've got to make much more of an effort on project preparation, I think with the multilateral development banks as well. So I think that's something we should definitely highlight going forward. And thank you also for mentioning the legal framework. That's important too, as well. Let me turn now to Ganbold Basanjayev, who is Director of the East and Northeast Asia Office for United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, or more simply known as UNESCAP. Great to have you here, Ganbold, as well. Prior to joining UNESCAP, Ganbold worked extensively for the government of Mongolia, serving within the country in the foreign ministry, as well as abroad in a diplomatic capacity. He was most recently actually the ambassador at large for sustainable development, I believe, at Mongolia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. UNESCAP is extremely important in terms of Mongolia's development. So Ganbold, when we talk about environmentally sustainable economic growth in Mongolia, what do you think we mean by that? And why is transition towards low carbon growth so important for Mongolia, given it's such a resource-rich country? Over to you.
Thank you, David. Good evening, colleagues. Good evening, Deputy Prime Minister Amar Sakhan. Thank you to ODF for organizing this online event. It is indeed a timely engagement on Mongolia's journey to sustainable economic recovery. As we further see the developments and implementation of Mongolia's new recovery policy after its launch in the end of 2021. In characterizing what environmental and sustainable economic growth means in Mongolia, allow me to filter it through the lens of the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. And doing so, let me highlight key elements of Mongolia's United Nations Sustainable Development Framework, or UNSDCF, to draw out not only the different dimensions of an environmentally sustainable economic growth, but also to put in perspective how Mongolia is progressing to achieve this envisaged kind of growth. For additional context, this framework embodies the joint strategic planning framework for collaboration between the United Nations and the government of Mongolia in the next 5 years until 2027, and is closely aligned with the National Development Agenda as articulated in Mongolia's Vision 2050. And environmentally sustainable economic growth seeks to balance development outcomes between shared prosperity and what is good for the planet. Set against Mongolia's circumstances, in terms of shared prosperity, it is an economic growth that is more diversified across economic sectors, geographically balanced and innovative. In addition, it is an economic growth that creates not only productive employment, but also addresses inclusivity, creating more decent jobs and opportunities that enhance employability of marginalized groups. In relation to the planet, in Mongolia, it is an economic growth that follows low carbon pathways and it's resource efficient, where the socioeconomic benefits of resource use, both on consumption and production patterns, are maximized while minimizing the impacts. Also, it is an economic growth that strengthens resilience through addressing climate change and disaster risks. With such a description of what an environmentally sustainable economic growth means in Mongolia, undoubtedly we recognize the different development challenges and issues that need to be considered. While it is true that Mongolia was among the first countries to adopt the 2030 agenda, with the Parliament of Mongolia approval of the country's long-term strategic sustainable development vision 2030 in February 2016, Mongolia's progress in achieving the SDGs has been quite challenging. According to the Sustainable Development Report 2022, the overall SDG index for Mongolia is 63.5, ranked 119th out of 163 countries. And this is below the East and Southeast Asia regional average. Since 2015, the country has made progress on many SDGs, such as poverty reduction and quality education, while also moderately improving in gender equality, health, decent work, clean energy, and infrastructure. But it has also regressed since 2015 on responsible consumption and production and climate action, two goals amongst the 17 goals, which are the most direct measures of how efficiently or inefficiently material resources are being used. It is in this context that Mongolia finds the strong impetus to transition towards low carbon growth. For one, such transition is important for Mongolia to urgently reverse the acute lapse in how it uses its resources. In addition, transitioning towards low carbon growth could unlock new growth drivers beyond resource-dependent activities, which would expand Mongolia's economic base as well as generate employment opportunities. And furthermore, by pursuing a low carbon growth trajectory, Mongolia rises to the challenges of being a key player to meaningfully contribute to addressing the global threat of climate change. Let me end my intervention here. Thank you, David. Over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Gunvald. That's quite an interesting set of issues you raised. And I saw the Deputy Prime Minister was nodding in agreement with you about some of the challenges, particularly around SDG implementation, and clearly the need to step up. And I think obviously the plan is, as I understand it, for the Mongolian authorities really to renew the emphasis on implementation to try and achieve the SDGs. But again, we can ask the Deputy Prime Minister in a few minutes to speak about that. So just before I'm going to throw a few questions to the panelists now. But just before I do that, just to say that we do encourage those participants who are watching this to send any questions to the Q&A slot. I think we have one question maybe already, but it'll be good to have a few questions from the panel to the panel if we have time. We've got about 20 minutes left. Let me start with the next round of questions to our panelists. Now, earlier this month, Rio Tinto opened the first underground section, we heard about this, of the Oyu Tolgoi mine in the South Gobi region of Mongolia. This mine is one of the largest known copper and gold deposits in the world. I actually went to the mine back in 2013, and it's good to hear about the underground section now being opened. Let me ask the Deputy Prime Minister, what does this mine actually mean for Mongolia's economic growth? And how does it fit into the new recovery policy? And Deputy Prime Minister, I know that this mine was, shall we say, at the heart of many debates as part of Mongolia's democratic development. I remember the population view about it, the revenue sharing issues that that were came up time and again. So in a way, it's been at the heart of the sort of democratic and economic development debate of Mongolia. So tell us now how you see this mine, really what it means for the economic growth of the future of the country.
Well, you've been to the site and you already know how huge this project is. So the Oyu Tolgoi, this mine perfectly fits into Mongolia's new recovery policy. The government of Mongolia attaches great importance to its strategic partnership with Rio Tinto. The recently resolved long-standing issue between the two parties shows how both sides are committed to this project. So we assume and see this project is a structure that forms an important structure and an important example that forms a core part of transforming and modernizing and expanding our industries. And this could be a great example for many other similar projects and different projects in different sectors. It is the largest third neighbor foreign direct investment project and has one of the biggest resources for our economic sustainable growth of our economy. And Oyu Tolgoi continues to boost the state budget and by ensuring that the government can reinvest this for the betterment of the Mongolian citizens, especially focusing on to build the middle class. This is a very important contribution and very significant commitment by the joint cooperation. So currently Oyu Tolgoi's workforce consists of almost 97% consists of Mongolian, and there are almost 20,000 workers. All of them are skilled and fits into their job requirement. And 1/5 is female, which matches perfectly to the government's drive for more gender equality across the nation and across the industry. And there, like Ms. Hargit mentioned, there's a lot of raised out important issues and questions, especially supporting and encouraging SMEs. Currently, there are over 500 suppliers and SMEs supplying products and services and things like that. So back in 2022, Oyu Tolgoi produced close to 130,000 tons of copper concentrate and 183,000 ounces of gold in concentrate. And by the 2030, Oyu Tolgoi is expected to become the 4th largest copper producer in the world, producing almost 500,000 tons of copper per year. So, and then in addition, Rio's purchase of this Turkish hill and also means that the project is moving forward with simpler and more efficient ownership and governance. And our Prime Minister recently attended the opening ceremony of the undercutting and undermining, which will be, operating smoothly as we expect. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Prime Minister. I can still remember the day at the EBRD board, I think it was back in late 2012, early 2013, when we approved the investment in Oyu-Tolgoi.
Mhm.
And it was at that time, the biggest ever investment EBRD had ever made. And I'm really heartened to hear what you say about resolving the issues with Rio Tinto and now finding a joint way ahead. I think what you said about the emphasis on inclusion and the fact that it has quite a high percentage of females in the workforce. Again, Mongolia in the region stands out for its commitment, but it's also its willingness to do something about inclusion compared with many of the neighboring states. I think that's really, really good to know. And you're absolutely right. You and Zhuja Hagitai both mentioned that actually the subcontractors and the contractors that are linked to this mine, so the mine has lots of backward and forward linkages, basically, which really is quite important for the economy. So it is a very important, mine for the economic growth of Mongolia. I think we get that. This theme is coming through in many of these present comments that people are making, the panelists, that we have a really good strategy. What we really need to focus on is implementation. That implementation is, this is a common issue from everything people have said. So that's a good takeaway for all of us. Talking about foreign investment, if I can ask Mr. Niam Delek, why should investors be interested in Mongolia? What makes Mongolia special? Because investors have choices. They don't necessarily have to go to Mongolia. Why should they choose Mongolia? And what are the opportunities you see in the new recovery policy to excite foreign investors to come to Mongolia?
Thank you. So as the policy bank of Mongolia, the development bank, we constantly have conversation with foreign investors and monitor the international markets. And the feedback that we hear a lot for the last few years is investors usually complain about policy uncertainty in Mongolia. And they talk about a policy sudden change once after the election, and the conversation stops and we have to start again anew on all the major policy parts. So from my perspective, the crucial point of the new recovery policy is that it raises this policy uncertainty. So in other words, it identifies the main areas for the development and identifies 90 projects that the government sees as priority to implement first. And the bank has did a preliminary analysis on all the projects. About half of them has a social element. The other half could have some financial feasibility potential. And some of the projects have a very high IRR, internal rate of return, even reaching 50–60%. But usually it starts from 15% to 20–30%. So as the frontier market with the economic growth bound, we think that the new recovery policy projects have a unique rate of return for foreign investors, and that's what we try to communicate to the investors.
We've got just 5 minutes left. I'm going to put two questions, I think, in one go to the Deputy Prime Minister. One of the questions in the chat we have is about agriculture. What should the country be trying to do in terms of exporting high quality animal products? That's one question I'd like you just to think about and say something about. And the second one is more on the financial side. What are the plans for a sovereign wealth fund and how to take that forward in Mongolia as well? And then I'll come back to all the panelists for a quick fire last question each. DPM, you'll need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you for your question. What we need to do to support and develop our agricultural sector is to first adopt new and advanced technologies, improve work skill of the people and experts in this sector, and support them with soft financing and flexible funding. So those are the three things to support them efficiently. That's the key three issues. And of course, there are many other things need to be solved, including having better legal and investment environment. But we do have very strong platform here and all the resource here with vast territory and natural resource, including this, whether it's fertilizers or fodder or hay or everything can be grown here, including the vegetables for export. Number two, sovereign wealth fund. We have this. Our government actually been working on the draft law for the last 2.5 years, since its establishment back in 21. And we have our draft of new law of foreign sovereign funds ready in our hand. And we have everything set to be submitted to the parliament, and hopefully we will have it reviewed by the parliament during the spring session and approved. And at the same time, we are working to improve the efficiency of the state-owned corporations and mining companies like Erdnas Mongol or ETT or OT Mongolia. So those are being settled at the same time to have right structure on one side and have the better legal environment on the other side. And combining these two, we will be able to realize our ambition and goal to implement.
Now, panelists, we have precisely 2 minutes left, and I'd like you all to be extremely brief. And I'm going to ask all of you, I'll come to the Deputy Prime Minister last. I'll start with Mandul, then Bolorma, and then Ganbold, and then I'm going to ask Olena and Elvira as well, and then the Deputy Prime Minister. What's your top hope for 2023 in Mongolia for this year? What's the most important thing you can think Mongolia should be doing? Mandul.
I think on the back of a strong economic rebound and successful exit from COVID, I think 2023 would be the turning point for Mongolia in terms of economic development. And I would say that we are back in business.
Great, good answer. Thank you. Bolorma.
Great. I think 23 is going to be continued recovery. New recovery policy is going to be second year in implementation. EBRD's forecast is economic growth of about 7%. And EBRD was actually most on the point on for last year's growth. So I'm going to trust those numbers for 23. The government's continued work against corruption, middle class is going to be a key part of the new recovery as well for 23.
Great, thanks, Bolorma. Ganbold.
Yeah, absolutely. The year 2023 is yet another year of opportunities for Mongolia. For more importantly, together with the rest of the world, the year marks the midpoint of the journey to achieving the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. And Mongolia is marking this milestone year by undergoing its second voluntary national review, having done the first in 2019. With this review, Mongolia is presented with the opportunity to assess its experiences, including successes, challenges, and lessons learned, and seek ways to strengthen policies and institutions of governments, and to mobilize multi-stakeholder support and partnerships for the implementation of Sustainable Development Goals. From our side at the United Nations, we have always reiterated our readiness as Mongolia's trusted partner in achieving the SDGs. Thank you, Suri.
Thank you very much, Gamble. Well, Elvira and Elena, what's you hoping for in 2023 for Mongolia?
Thank you so much. Given the launch of Oyu Tolgoi mine in Mongolia, I really hope that Mongolia utilizes this opportunity to strengthen its resilience, to increase self-sufficiency, and to reduce imports. Also, it is very important that Mongolia supports its population against inflation, and the consumption is also very resilient in the country.
Thanks very much. Elena?
Oh, thank you, Suma. I think from my side, I really hope that there is a big push forward on the renewable energy. It's a priority for the government, it's a priority for the development banks, both EBRD, ADB, but also others working in the country, and it will also help to support Mongolia's industrialization and other objectives, as well as its climate ambitions.
Okay. Thanks, Elena and Elvira. Thank you very much. And so, Deputy Prime Minister, what do you hope for in 2023? You've got so much on your plate.
Well, the strong effort and commitment of our government have ensured that 2022 our GDP grew by 4% when many analysts forecasted the growth of just over 2%. But the GDP growth in the first quarter of 2023 was 10.2%, which put us back on track. And we really hope that this will continue. And we really hope that our economic growth will bring better living standards for our people in 2023. And we will continue to work and fight day and night for stronger and stronger economic growth by implementing the new recovery policies so that our future prosperity is shared by all the people nationwide. So perhaps the most exciting prospect for Mongolia in 2023 lies within also tourism, because we have announced that the 2023 to 2025 will be the years to visit Mongolia, and we aim to increase our tourists up to 1 million in this year. So there are many optimistic forecasts and calls. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Prime Minister. Well, I hope we at ODI can be more than tourists. We will continue to engage with you, but we'll also enjoy the country as well when we come to visit as well and to work there. But I think you're absolutely right to stress the centrality of economic growth. That's absolutely right. Thank you for that. So we've come to the end of today's event, but let me just pull out 3 or 4 key points from the discussions we've heard today. First of all, I think diversification and industrialization are key for Mongolia to affect that sustainable economic recovery in the long term. You know, you have the R in NRP. It may stand for recovery, but another key word that we've been hearing throughout the discussion today is resilience as well. And building resilience to future shocks, I think, is of course at the core of Mongolia's NRP and Vision 2050. And I'm heartened from what I heard today about the work that's underway to build a stronger and more diverse economy. Second, we heard also how critical Mongolia's economic recovery and growth, the measures to support its green development agenda. And we've heard very promising signs from all the speakers about how that's going to take place. And I'm really encouraged by that as well. And third, you know, I think we've been talking about Mongolia today, and I mentioned that I started my career in Botswana, and some similar issues about, you know, economies that are reliant on natural resources. What do you do in this situation? And particularly those economies have been particularly badly affected by events in recent years. It's great to hear Mongolia is on the recovery path and actually is doing better than the forecasts, actually, which is good news. But I think the direction that Mongolia's economic recovery takes is going to have a wider impact on emerging markets, on other natural resource dominated economies in the region, but also beyond the region, actually. And because they all need to adapt. And I think it's always been interesting for me how Mongolia has always thought about this and focused on this. And I think you will be a benchmark for other countries in this respect. Fourth and last, but not the least, we're all very good in the ODI or in the Mongolian authorities, government, or in many countries at thinking about the strategy. We know what we need to do. We just need to do it. And implementation is crucial. And we all know this is where everything, when the rubber hits the road, as they say, that's what it really matters. So we need to implement. And that's really important for Mongolia too. So let me thank our speakers for taking the time to be with us today. Thank my colleagues at ODI for hosting us. And finally, a warm thank you to all the participants, over 50 of you who joined us today. I hope that you continue these conversations and that today's event is frankly the start of more fruitful discussions on Mongolia's economic recovery. We at ODI, Deputy Prime Minister and colleagues, we at ODI will remain engaged with Mongolia. I would personally love to be more closely engaged with you. I think the country deserves all our support. It is a beacon of both democratic and economic development. And I really wish you well in the future and what you're trying to do. Thank you all very, very much for attending.